So my name is Liz Dunn. I am the Safeguarding Learning Project Development Officer for the Safeguarding Children's Partnerships of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, which in a nutshell means that I'm responsible for sort of multi-agency training in safeguarding across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. And we've recently uploaded, created, developed a new elective home education procedure. So that's why I'm here today to talk to you about that. But with me today, I have Andrea. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, Andrea.
Yeah, morning everybody. I'm Andrea Tyler, the Senior Coordinator for the Inclusion Team in Rutland, and it's my team that manages elective home education.
Brilliant, thanks, Andrea. And this PowerPoint has been put together with the 3 leads from the local authorities, the leads in elective home education. So this is what we're going to look at this morning. We're going to be aware of the National Panel Report, Safeguarding Children in Elective Home Education. And I'll start to fall over that. That's why it's called EHE. I think it's so difficult to keep saying. Be aware of the new elective home education procedure. Understand what the law says about roles and responsibilities for those working with children who are home educated and how this can impact on safeguarding. And that's really kind of the crux of what we want to share this morning. And because of the sort of almost limited roles of people, it's really significant that we work together as a multi-agency where we're concerned about children who are being home educated. So why are children home educated? So this is a study from 2020, so it's around that sort of COVID time, and it was in Hertfordshire, but it's a fairly similar picture sort of nationally. And these are sort of reasons that people give. So inflexibility of school system, because it tests, it monitors, it has a standard curriculum, and it starts school fairly early, some people think. Parents and carers who home educated often saw the school environment as not conducive to learning or well-being, so they felt that their children were better sort of nurtured in a more homely environment. Some thought that children with special educational needs and disabilities, that they didn't get enough support for their children while they were in school. Again, we've seen, particularly since COVID, actually, I mean, sometimes before COVID, but since COVID, that children, the experience of school was quite negative on their mental health and well-being. And this kind of resulted in some quite extreme sort of responses, meltdowns and breakdowns. So obviously that would cause anxiety for parents as well, so they would want to home educate. And then there's parents who thought that their concerns in relation to their child who had special educational needs and disabilities and their well-being wasn't being taken seriously. So then they felt like they didn't have any sort of control over that. There is some pressure to withdraw children from school when schools displayed little attempt to support children. And this pressure was more acute when families were facing fines for non-attendance while underlying issues were not addressed. So almost this kind of cyclic thing where the child's not going to school because there's issues in school and feel like they need support, but then the response potentially is a fine, which doesn't help. So it exacerbates the situation. So then what does a parent do next? And sometimes they remove their child from school. Some parents and carers, and most particularly those who had never sent their children to school, had a strong educational philosophy that was at odds with what was practiced within schools. So some people don't want their child to be sort of churned out of a system, come out in a specific, they'd see it as a system that they didn't want their child to be part of. And also for a small number of families, parental work, home life, religious beliefs and financial situations meant that home education was regarded as a better fit for their lives. So lots of different things there. And again, since COVID, we've seen that, parents are now working from home. So sometimes that's made them realise that there's different ways of managing their child's education. Faith, religious beliefs, we see locally as a reason often given for children to be taken out of school. So, making sure that the education is in line with what parents believe. Okay. But, and this is really, really important, home education is not and in itself a safeguarding risk. Many families the Children's Commissioner Office spoke to reflected on the benefits of home education for their child's well-being and development. So we are not worried about home educated children as this homogenous group. We are only worried about the ones where we have safeguarding concerns. And this was from a report that the Children's Commissioner did in 2024, so relatively recent, Lost in Transition, the Destinations of Children Who Leave the State Education System. And just to let you know, you will get copies of the slides, and in the slides there's the links to all the things that we're going to be talking about. So this is the procedure. Like I said, there's a link on that slide, so you'll get that. And it sort of begins by highlighting that Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, so that's LLR, encourage and support parents and carers to enrol their children at school. It nevertheless recognises that parents and carers have a right to educate their children at home. And then it says it's committed to working in partnership with these home educating parents and carers. So that's kind of the ethos of the procedure, if you like. We want to work with those parents to make sure that they're receiving an appropriate, that the children are receiving an appropriate education. The policy aims to achieve an appropriate balance between the rights of the home education parents and carers on the one hand and the responsibilities of the local authority on the other, and we'll come on to what they are. And it says that their approach is in line with the principles for working with parents and carers as set out in Working Together to Safeguard Children. So this was reviewed in 2023, and it has these kind of strong threads of effective partnership working with parents and carers built on strong, positive, trusting and cooperative relationships. So it's more sort of like co-production, that we're working with people, not doing unto, is a real theme through Working Together. It also talks about strong and robust multi-agency working arrangements. So we need to work together to be able to manage home education issues, particularly where we have safeguarding concerns. So this is the key. And then proactive information sharing to identify, assess and respond to risks or concerns about the safety and welfare of children. And sometimes, because of some of the boundaries around home education, that can be quite difficult. Okay, so a little look at Working Together. Like I said, this was new in 2023, updated, revised. And this says it is important that relevant information where children are home educated is shared between local authorities, schools, colleges and other relevant partners. So that's my emphasis I've put in there. But these statutory sort of requirements inform our local approach to information sharing in response to those children that have become electively home educated. And you can see there's two parts in this slide. It's when they're not a registered pupil at a school and they're not receiving suitable education at home. Because if they're not receiving that suitable education at home and they're not a registered pupil at school, then this could be an indicator of neglect, abuse or exploitation. But of course, they may still be receiving an appropriate education at school, but at home, but we might also still have safeguarding worries and concerns, and that's where sometimes it can be difficult to discern what it is that we're worried about. And then further references to elected home education for Working Together are point 68, which talks about children that might be attending activities, clubs, those things that regular kids go to, football, dance, chess club, lots of different activities. And if you're in one of those environments and you have a concern about a child where they're home educated, it's important that you raise a concern anyway, but it's important to share that information because you might be one of the only people who has oversight. So what we find difficult to do with home education children is monitor them. So they're taken out of that statutory kind of school environment where we have oversight of what's going on, and we don't with home educated children. So where they're in those clubs, it's really important that if there are any concerns, they're relayed to the safeguarding leads and passed on. It also talks about all children aged 5 to 16 are legally entitled to a full-time education. Education is essential for children's progress, well-being and wider development, and being at school is a protective factor against wider harms, including exploitation. Where children are not receiving education either because they are persistently missing school or are not registered at a school and not receiving a suitable education otherwise, this could be a possible indicator of neglect, abuse or exploitation, or could in itself constitute neglect in severe and sustained cases. And that actual paragraph is also included in the procedure. So you can see we're just trying to kind of pull together the information that we've got. But again, it's where they're not receiving that education where we might have concerns. Safeguarding professionals should work closely with education and childcare settings to ensure information about children is shared effectively. Risks of harm are correctly identified and understood, and children and families receive the services they need. This includes, but is not limited to, information such as increased absence or mental health problems, which may be indicators that a child has suffered or is at risk of suffering neglect, abuse, and exploitation. So this is where perhaps schools do have a child who's attending, and then their parent suggests that they're going to take them out of school to home educate, and there might already be concerns bubbling up there about that child anyway. So it can be shared, if that's shared appropriately, that can help to sort of protect a child and perhaps indicate the response that safeguarding partners might have. So, what is a parent's duty in law? So what is it in regard to their education? So Section 7 of the Education Act 1996 states that the parent of every child of compulsory school age shall cause him to receive efficient full-time education suitable A, to his age, ability and aptitude, and B, to any special educational needs he may have, either by regular attendance at school or otherwise. And that or otherwise is means elective home education. And we have a lot of home educated families across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. I know the last time I was speaking to Ellen Collier in the city, she said, you know, they'd got as many that might sort of fill a small sort of secondary school, between 800 to 1,000 children. And most of those we have no concerns about whatsoever. They're being appropriately educated and we're happy about those. There's only a small percentage where there might be concerns. And also to reassure sort of colleagues on the call that there's a lot of contact between education, welfare and social care colleagues. So if the children, perhaps we've already got concerns about when they're pulled out of school, were taken out of school, then, you know, there's probably some conversations already happening there. And there's quite a good sort of liaison between all the local authorities and their education welfare colleagues. So the last slide was from the law, and this is from the procedure, which refers also to the law. So the responsibility for a child's education rests with their parents. In England, education is compulsory, but school is not. Article 2, Protocol 1 of the European Convention on Human Rights states that no person shall be denied the right to education in the exercise of any functions which it assumes in relation to education and to teaching. The state shall respect the right of parents to ensure such education and teaching is in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. So we have a right to educate our children. We have a right to educate them in the way that we see fit, but they have to be educated and they have to meet some restrictions that I'll come on to. And if parents choose to home educate, they must be prepared to assume full financial responsibility for doing so. So that might be exams, books, other educational trips, etc. Okay. So what can we as a local authority do if we think that a child shouldn't, you know, to prevent a family from educating their child at home? Well, there's actually very few reasons, if you like, exceptions to the automatic right. And one is if a child has a special school named in their education, health and care plan, and if we receive a request to, well, the local authority receives a request to deregister a child, then there'd be a multi-agency conversation about whether or not they're happy for the child to be removed. Is the child going to receive a suitable education? Does the parent have the ability to provide that themselves? Are they able to make the arrangements to home educate? And in some cases, the local authority will agree, and in some cases they won't. So they'll look at that holistically to see what's best for that child. Also, if they've had contact, the local authorities had contact with the family previously and serviced a school attendance order on a parent because they've had concerns that a child is not on a school roll and not receiving an education otherwise. So that's why they'd get that school attendance order. Then what the local authority would say in that case is that there's an order in place, you can't deregister that child, and you'd have to revoke the order by evidencing that you'd were providing appropriate home education. If the child's looked after, then the local authority does have parental responsibility for the child, so they have to agree to that child being removed from a school roll. And that has happened where children have been taken to be home educated, and actually in one case recently it meant that the child actually came back into the care system, was taken away from home, came back into the care system, and actually was put on a roll of a school as well. And then finally, it's where parents don't agree. So if there's two parents with parental responsibility and they don't agree with the child being removed, then they'd either have to come to a mutual decision, or that I'd have to go through the courts to change the child's educational status. But these are odd and exceptional cases, so these are not the norm, if you like. So what should it look like? Now, the Department for Education guidance is very thorough. The Education Act says that they have to provide an education that is full-time and suitable to age, ability and aptitude and any special educational needs. They have to follow the guidance, which is really thorough, but it does say a lot about what they do. It says a lot about what they don't have to do and not a lot about what they do have to do. So they don't have to teach the same lessons in school that are taught in school. They don't have to keep the same school hours. So home education can look very, very different, which is sometimes why it's difficult to understand if an appropriate curriculum is being provided. But there is some case law that is really helpful. This is around, this is Harrison and Harrison versus Stevenson. And this says that maths and English have to be taught because children have to be progressing in maths and English. And if they're not, then that can't be considered suitable in terms of a curriculum. And so our colleagues in home education rely quite heavily on this to show that actually that is part of the curriculum that needs to be taught. So it's been really useful for them to be able to refer to this case law. Okay, so we've heard about the parents. What is the local authority's duty in relation to electively home educated children? So it doesn't actually come from a law on home education. It comes from regulations around children missing from education and those who are not on the school roll. So local authorities have a duty under Section 436A of the Education Act 1996 to make arrangements to establish the identities of children in their area who are not registered pupils at a school and are not receiving suitable education otherwise. This duty only relates to children of a compulsory school age. So we might think that's quite easy. But what if a child has never been in an education environment? So where a parent advises that their child is electively home educated, and where the education the child is receiving is not suitable, they are considered as a child missing from education. So then there's a local authority process that they go through, which culminates in a school attendance order, which we've already spoken about. It's until the local authority are not satisfied that the child is receiving a suitable home education. So they have to know about the child, they have to know that they're not receiving a suitable home education. And it's not until that point that they can serve that order. And that's the first point that a parent is compelled legally to engage with the local authority. So you can imagine that local authorities are trying to actively encourage parents to engage with them. They want to encourage them to let them know that they're home educating. But because of the reasons that we talked about right at the very beginning, that there are some kind of quite strong reasons why people don't want their children to be involved with the state. They don't want them churned out in this way. There can be some sort of tensions around building that relationship, and home educating parents being concerned that the local authority just wants to take over or wants to have a say in what's their child's being educated, when really it's just checking out kind of process and making sure that it is suitable. But there is a high court, another court decision. This is a high court decision, and this is Goodred versus Portsmouth City Council. And I believe that there was a lot of kind of toing and froing between the local authority and this family, where the family was saying, you kind of got no right to ask for that information. So they asked for some information and they said it wasn't really enough. They couldn't ascertain, the local authority couldn't ascertain whether the education was sufficient and appropriate. And so they asked for more information. And the family were saying, well, they're interfering, they haven't got a right. But the High Court judgment said that actually local authorities are entitled to ask for that information. So again, this is a really useful kind of tool lever for when working with families. But obviously we'd actually, everybody who's trying to build that kind of cooperative type of relationship wants it to be to happen probably much earlier in the situation, where there's more kind of, okay, we're doing this, okay, well actually, what about this? Yes, we're doing that as well. So, needs to be, we'd like it to be a lot more kind of a relationship rather than this kind of hostility that sometimes comes. Okay, so I'm just going to show you this photograph. You perhaps recognize this young girl. It's Sarah Sharif, and she was a child who was removed from school by her family, despite teachers having notice marks on her face and referred her to social services. So these are some of the children that we're worried about, where we've perhaps already got concerns and then they're removed from school. So the school had recognised or had raised concerns that they thought that Sarah had changed, her behaviour had changed, and she had got some bruising. And then the parents, it was the dad and the stepmom, removed Sarah from school. And the judge in this case said homeschooling allowed the abuse at the hands of her father and stepmother to carry on beyond the gaze of authorities. And this is our concern, where we have worries about children, is that monitoring of them when they're home educated is greatly limited. We don't actually know the overall circumstances of this case in terms of learning from this case, because the review hasn't been released yet. But one of the responses to this is that there is a bill going through Parliament, and this bill is about children who are not home educated being registered. So you'd think we'd have a register anyway, wouldn't you? So there's this duty for local authorities sort of to gather information, but how can they do that if they don't know? Now we would have known that Sarah Sharif was being electively home educated, so it may not have made any difference to her case, but it is really quite beneficial to have an idea of who are the children that are being electively home educated. And what it's done as well is it's kind of forced the issue of elective home education back into the forefront and back into sort of the public arena. And this is the bill that's going through Parliament. It's a homeschool education registration and support bill. And this actual slide is the title of the bill. So a bill to require parents who choose to home educate their children to register with the local authority, to make provision about the maintenance of registers by local authorities of children in their area who are not full-time pupils at any school, to make provision about support by local authorities to promote the education and safeguarding of such children, and for connected purposes. So this would require parents to register with the local authority. And that's the whole title, and there's a link to it there. And it was also a recommendation from the National Panel Report Safeguarding Children in Elective Home Education, which was published in May 2024. So you can see there's a lot of activity around this. And if this bill was to be approved, then this section would be inserted into the Education Act. And that register would help local authorities to know who those children are who are electively home educated and would aid monitoring. But what I suspect is that they're where we have safeguarding concerns, it would probably still be an area where parents wouldn't comply. So, you know, where we've got safeguarding concerns, we still need to work in that multi-agency way and not rely on a register to make sure that children are being monitored. And, you know, it kind of seems unthinkable that the children who are home educated that we know nothing about, who go through their whole education and the local authority knows nothing about them because they've always been home educated and they haven't had the requirement before to go on to a register. Okay, so safeguarding. It isn't that people in the social care element of local authorities that they understand that there is a lack of powers and duties around home education. So like I said before, there's quite a lot of connection between education and local authorities in this arena, because until that kind of awareness was realised, there were times when sort of action plans were being closed, saying the child will be monitored by the home education team, but there are no powers or duties to go into a home to see a child or even to see a learning environment. So we're lacking in powers around home educated children, and so if a plan was being closed saying, oh, we'll just let the home education team monitor that child, that wouldn't be happening. That's not possible. They're not able to do that. It has to be coming from social care to go into a home if there's concerns or worries, and it's not about the education side of it. So it is important for all professionals working with children and families to be aware that in respect of the education regulations, there is no right of access to an electively home educated child's home, no right to see the child, and no duty or power to carry out any routine monitoring of the elected home education. I don't know if you can remember, some of you who have been around for a while, with Kyra Ishak. Kyra Ishak was a girl in Birmingham who the school had lots of concerns about her. She was removed from school, and school tried to get into that. They went round to the home, they knocked on the door. School themselves, not the electively home educated teams. There were so many concerns about Kyra, but they weren't allowed into the home. And Kyra Ishak, unfortunately, died at the hands of her parents in that home. And she wasn't being fed, you know, she was seriously neglected in that environment. So the first point at which a parent is required at the moment by law to satisfy the local authority that the child is receiving a suitable education is when they have been issued with a school attendance order. Oh yeah, that's how it will be. So that's when they need to say, look at what I'm providing. It's adequate, it's appropriate. And as we know, that the local authority are entitled to ask for that information as well. But it's only Department for Education guidance that parents should respond to our request for assurance. But the Department for Education are really proactive in encouraging parents. But again, there's no powers. Really, it's you can see that it's kind of lacking as I'm going through this. And for the most part, parents will provide that information, albeit sometimes reluctantly. But where we have worries and concerns, this is where we need to kind of work together. And we had a case locally where we realised that there was a child in the household that, until social care became involved, we didn't know about the child, because they'd never been in school. They'd always been home educated. So we were trying to support a process where information was shared at that sort of 5-year point. So health data, so all the children that we think should be ready to start school, if there could be sort of that list shared between health and social care. I mean, this doesn't happen in a way that, oh, here's a list, here it is. It's because of GDPR, it's not possible to do that. So we're looking at ways of trying to find some of those missing children at that point across LLR. So it's sort of in place to a certain extent, but it's a little bit kind of relying on people to notice, or people to be concerned about children in that at that stage. I think I'm right in saying that, aren't I, Andrea? Yeah. So it's kind of, we can't just supply big data banks in this way. That's where GDPR is kind of impactful. But where we have safeguarding concerns, of course, we can share information. So we need to be clear that that's where we are sharing the information, where we've got concerns or worries. Okay. So this is all from the procedure, and these are kind of the points that I've already talked about, so I'll be quite swift about this. You'll get the slide, so you'll be able to read it, and it's in the procedure if you wanted to read the whole procedure. So the primary interest of the local authority in terms of elective home education is the provision, not their reason to home educate. It's the provision, what's being provided. Local authority may request a home visit or a meeting with home educated parents, and of course that's what they try to do. They try to engage with the parents and get this mutual understanding that yes, the parents don't want their children at school, in that school environment, but they are providing that appropriate education, but they don't have to accept that home visit at all. And not accepting that home visit isn't a reason to be concerned necessarily about it. So you can see there, should home educated parents, however, persistently and repeatedly decline to respond to all reasonable inquiries made by a local authority, it may consider that it's unable to satisfy itself that the child is in receipt of a suitable education, and may consider need for further action. So that would be information from partners, potentially. Also within the elective home education procedure is we talk about Operation Encompass. Now, Operation Encompass, I'm sure you know, is where if the police attend a home around domestic abuse or other areas where they think it might have an impact on children, a safeguarding sort of impact, then they will share that information with school. And if a child's being electively home educated, that information will be shared with the electively home educated team as well. So it's making that service equitable at that point. And they would respond in the same way that a school might. They'd consider the information and see if they needed to take further steps. Children who are electively home educated can be less visible to professionals, and for this reason, careful consideration of their needs in response to safeguarding concerns is needed by all agencies. This oversight, this monitoring is really where that lack of it is where we're really worried. So health can play a massive part, because quite often we know that children who are electively home educated, well, almost always these children are still taken to health appointments. So it might be that they could see something that's concerning. Again, if parents are trying to evade authorities, they might not go to their health appointments. Children in school may already be causing concern with respect to safeguarding. So there may already be involvement by agencies. And then if that's happening, then the school should follow their safeguarding procedure, contact children's social care to discuss or make a referral, saying why they're concerned that this child has been removed from school because of all the other sort of intervention that has happened. So we do need to be sharing information, health, education, early help services, children's social care, all really important that we share information. And also to know that if the electively home education team are raising a concern, it's for a reason. They're not concerned about most of the children in their patch, in their area, who are being home educated. So why do they have concerns about this particular child or children? So we need to kind of respond appropriately to that. This is from the procedure, nothing unexpected, but these are some of the concerns that might be there. So social isolation, poor behaviour, unmet health needs, the parental sort of risks, mental health, substance abuse, domestic abuse. So those sort of complicating factors, lateness and poor attendance, poor presentation, children with special educational needs where they're not being met, and that frequent changes of school. And you keep seeing exploitation. You'll notice that comes up a lot. And we know that children who are missing from education, so who aren't attending school regularly, they're really vulnerable to that sort of grooming process, because people who are grooming children are quite often very clever, and they'll sort of pick them off. They'll see that they need some where to identify, and if they're not getting that at school, it's quite they're quite vulnerable to grooming. Okay. Where children's social care become involved. This is about some of those softer skills, that professional curiosity. What is the child's lived experience like? Understand that they're not being seen routinely by lots of different people necessarily. So it's all about questioning, triangulating. Who are they seeing? There are home education networks across Leicestershire and Rutland. A lot of children who are home educated will go to those networks. So they'll have learning trips together. They'll do lessons together. So are they accessing these? If not, why not? Should we be concerned about that? Are anybody from those groups raising concerns as well? So, this should be taken account of as part of consideration for thresholds and when a referral is made. Okay, so in addition to sort of Sarah Sharif being in the news and the move to change the bill, the Act of Parliament so that people register, and we have a new procedure, but there's also this Safeguarding Children in Elective Home Education Child Safeguarding Practice a report by the Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel. So the Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel sees all of the referrals where a child has been seriously harmed or killed and abuse and neglect is suspected. So all the referrals that come into the go to the Child Safeguarding Practice Review, and they come to the Safeguarding Children's Partnership. And reviews are done. These might be rapid reviews or they might be child safeguarding practice reviews, but they see all of these. And they've looked at all the ones that are around home education, and they've created this report from that. Again, they start with the quote from the Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel de Souza, that we're not worried about all of our children. We just who are home educated. We're just worried about a small minority within that cohort. And the report looks at 27 rapid reviews. And what it recognises is that actually the number of reviews that include children who are electively home educated, the percentage has gone up. So from November 21 to October 22, there were 342 rapid reviews. 8 of those were electively involved electively home educated children. But in the same period, 22 to 23, there were 395 rapid reviews, so a fairly similar number, and 14 of these involved electively home educated children. So you can see the percentage has gone from 2% to 3.5%. It's still quite a small amount, you can see, but it's significant. It's a significant uplift, hence why there's some concerns around this. This is what happened to the 27 incidents. So sadly, 6 children died, 3 completed suicide, 1 had an undiagnosed eating disorder, 1 died from undiagnosed leukemia. So you can see that where parents are evading the monitoring from school, they're also not going to other sort of statutory agencies like health and getting support and help for their children. And then 1 died as a result of stabbing. And you can see that element of sort of where there's we're concerned about exploitation there. And then it talks about 20 had physical neglect, 16 physical abuse, 10 sexual abuse, 8 had their food restricted. So this kind of neglectful behaviour of restricting food. So lots of different behaviours going on there. There was sort of 3 kind of areas that they thought were significant. So just over half had never attended school. There were children who had been invisible to services altogether. So over half of the children who'd never attended school had been kept out of sight of any agency. Okay, so you can see there is some kind of concerns there about how do we even know about them. And then faith as a factor, and that is something that we see locally. And of course, it may not be an issue at all, but it's something that we need to not let fog our understanding of what's actually happening. So you can see here it says 7 siblings described exposure to religious or faith-based views associated with prolonged physical chastisement, no access to the internet, TV or radio, and isolated from others in the world outside. So you know, that's not what we'd consider to be a suitable or appropriate education for children in this country, regardless of their faith or etc. Okay, and then it said that there are broadly 3 groups of children who should be considered from a safeguarding perspective when they're being educated at home. So this is a repeat really of before. So those that are kept at home, never been at school, those that are withdrawn from school where there's already concerns. So we talked about that. And then those that are withdrawn from school because of faith or cultural reasons. So they've actually highlighted that as a group of children that we should be concerned about. So that doesn't mean to say that everybody who withdraws their child for that reason is not educating their child appropriately, but we need to understand that and not be fobbed off by saying that we don't understand the culture or we don't understand that's what we do in this our faith or whatever. We need to be triangulating that information, be professionally curious. But the recommendations for the report are interesting because the first 2 are about having a register. So the panel fully supports the introduction of a register and recommends the development of any future statutory register should give careful consideration about how the opinions and voice of children affected are taken into account in decision making. So putting that kind of thought and care and nurture around what's happening to the child, putting the child at the centre. And it talks about the duty that could be placed on a parent, and it recommends that the questions are considered by government as part of their work in introducing the register, which we know that they are now trying to do. It also recommends that the safeguarding partnerships, so that's I'm part of the board office that supports the safeguarding partnerships, assure themselves about the effectiveness of local systems pertaining to the safeguarding practice for children electively home educated. Hence why we have a new procedure. So we didn't actually have a procedure for home educated children before, we now do, and that's partly why we're having this session as well, to make people aware and to some of the boundaries and limitations around home education. Okay, so now I'm going to ask Andrea if she would like to explain what actually happens in Rutland around home education.
Yeah, and apologies, our office is really loud today, so if there's a little bit of background noise as well, I apologise. And just to kind of reiterate, I suppose, before I start, we do have a register. All of us have a register. It's just not a compulsory register, so we can't force people to sign that at the moment. But anyone that we become aware of is obviously added to a register that we then monitor. And we all had our separate procedures and processes, and what we've done is pull those together to make one across LLR, which has slight differences because we all do the actual day-to-day monitoring a little bit differently. As you probably imagine, Rutland has got quite small numbers of EHE, so it allows us to be quite personalised with our support. So all of our focus is on building positive relationships with our families that are home educating. When we're notified, our form that we have asks for any safeguarding concerns or issues that they're worried about with a child being home educated. And the first thing we would have to have a look at is, do we already know that child? Are they on our system? Is there any involvement with either social care or family help or our SEND team or our early years inclusion team? Do we know about them, and what do we know if we know about them? Then we'll make initial contact with families via telephone, and we conduct a triage assessment. We complete a form while we're doing that conversation. But again, that conversation is very much a supportive conversation. What are you doing? What does it look like? What are your plans? And while we're doing that, we'll be reg rating those cases. And what that reg rating does is it defines how quickly we will see that family. So we only have a duty to monitor home education annually. But if we have concerns either from the form we receive from our notifier or while we're doing that reg rating, we would see them much more quickly. It also has things on there to consider around transition ages. So if we're picking up children potentially at the end of year 5 or into year 6, again, that would look at us saying we need to see them a bit sooner because we need to think about what they're going to do at the next phase of education. Or if we're picking them up sort of now in year 10 or even in year 11, we'd obviously be concerned about what their education looks like for the remainder of their phase. So again, we would see them and contact them more quickly. Then we send a letter out that requests a review. We offer that face-to-face in a neutral location, in the home, on Teams. Basically, we're opening it out to say, however you will have contact with us, we are happy with that and we will work with that. We normally give them a date, a suggested date, and then we ask them to come back to us to either confirm that that's okay or to give us another date. As Liz has said, families don't have to have any communication with us. So some families will send us reports. And if that report suggests that there is a sufficient education, we have to take that as it is. And we have to sign that off as being suitable. And that suitability decision is made by either myself or we've just got a new inclusion officer who's going to be focusing on EHE, and that's done at the review. We look at what is being provided, what the whole education looks like, what socialisation looks like, what project work might look like. It looks really different in every family. And then we talk about that English and maths and what's happening there. And that decision is communicated to family at review. We don't go away and keep them out of the loop of that. We tell them what we think at the review. If something needs to change, we will talk about what that is, and we'll give them a timescale to do that. And if we're not happy with it and we don't think it's suitable, we'll tell them that as well. 9 times out of 10 they are suitable, and it will be a case of we'll see you next year, and we look forward to seeing what you've been doing in the next year. If it's not suitable, as I say, we'll make it very clear what's not suitable, when the report is sent, which is done very quickly, it highlights what needs to be looked at, and then we'll review again. That's pretty much us, I think, Liz. And it's very similar in the other two local authorities. It's just a little bit, that initial communication is a little bit different.
So thanks, Andrea. I was just saying we've included the slides from Leicester City and Leicestershire. So these have been, as I said, developed by the leads. And you can see they are very similar essentially, but just as you say, Andrea, just certain parts of it are slightly different, but not massively, because obviously they're all obviously A, operating within the law, and B, trying to encourage parents to become involved so that it can be a much more kind of amicable sort of arrangement, which benefits everybody, especially the children, doesn't it? So that's what those processes are there for you to look at should you need to, and also the links, as you can see on all of them, to the Electively Home Education sort of information from the local authority. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks.